Hello, this is Jonathan Mask, and welcome to this edition of the Sedgwick Podcast. Got two really knowledgeable and great guests today. Beth Burry, Managing Director, Clinical Managed Care Programs for Sedgwick, and Jo Copeland, Senior Vice President, Design and Strategy for Clinical Managed Care for Sedgwick. Thank you both for joining me today on this podcast.
Thanks for having us. It's awesome.
Yep, thanks, Jonathan.
Well, we are going to talk about something I know it's near and dear to both your hearts and is very interesting and exciting things that we have going on at Sedgwick, and that's the nurse triage service. And I know this continues to grow and evolve, and so just want to jump right in, and we'll start with Jo. And when we talk about this subject, on-the-job injuries present a variety of challenges for impacted employees and their employers. Can you explain to our listeners what clinical consultation and nurse triage services offer the injured worker and the employer organization when unexpected incidents occur for that worker?
Oh, of course. Thank you for the question. So I think we all know that the first interaction after an injury really does set the trajectory of the claim. So clinical consultation is our 24/7 nurse triage service, and it provides access to clinicians who can give guidance on the level of medical attention the employee needs and really helps to set the tone for the claim. It also helps so that you don't have supervisors or managers trying to make medical assessments around what kind of service that particular injury needs. So this kind of access to clinicians to help provide that level of guidance can, again, get that injured employee to the right level of medical attention based on the needs of the injury and really alleviate some of the burdens that we even place on the hospital system, because now you're avoiding emergency care for those things that don't really require emergency care, freeing up those resources to really focus on things that require a higher degree of clinical support. So super excited about talking about this because I think it really can make a difference in our customers' claims outcomes. So essentially 24/7 access to clinicians to help establish what the right level of medical attention is needed for an injured worker.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think as we toss it over to Beth, Sedgwick uses a blended model in some instances for the reporting of on-the-job injuries. Tell us more about this approach and how it differs from others and why those distinctions are significant to our listeners.
Sure, I'm happy to, Jonathan. What we call our blended intake model refers to triage occurring at the time that a claim can also be reported. And this is a huge advantage to our clients and their employees for a number of reasons. First of all, the employee only has one point of contact that they need to make. They may be calling in with their supervisor present, and the nurse will proceed in setting up the triage call, which with our blended model allows our nurses to have access a lot of times to an HR feed that our client may have set up with us. And if that is set up, they have access to all of the pertinent details like work location, their personal information, so that they can validate that information upon setting up the triage call. And then they're going to proceed in evaluating the circumstances of the injury or incident that's occurred. And once they are finished with their triage, they advise the employee of the right level of care, be it self-care, to go to a clinic, or perhaps perform self-care and wait to go to a clinic. They will then conclude the triage, and at that point in time, the information is all sent over via our SmartLead technology, and the claim is automatically set up, and it would be visible in the system to our claims examiner. They will have access to the nurse triage notes because that will match up automatically with the claim. And they can also get alerts in the system if our nurse feels like there's a specific concern or maybe there was something about the call that they feel like the examiner should re-listen to. Like if there's a comorbidity or there's a questionable mechanism of injury, anything that might warrant additional concern, that can be flagged. And this is really a great benefit, again, both for our clients from a timeliness of claim setup perspective and the employee, because they're not having to make multiple phone calls to report their claim and get triaged. And again, it's also really beneficial to our examiners because they have all of this information at their fingertips based upon that one triage call.
And now we get to the really hardest things that probably a lot of people want to know about, and I'll ask you both, Jo and Beth, and you can start first, Jo, on the question, but how does Sedgwick's triage nurses and examiners work together as part of the claims handling process to make this all happen?
Yeah, I think Beth touched on it, or actually explained it really, really well in terms of how that nurse is determining or giving recommendations on the right level of care, and then how that information is, when it's a blended customer, is almost immediately transferred to the examiner so that the examiner has access to information so that they can start making some claims management decisions. I always find the 24/7 or clinical consultation solution interesting because it really is sort of the first recording of what happened immediately after the injury occurred. And so I think for claims examiners to have real-time access to that kind of information can really bring an impact to the claims handling decisions that they have to make moving forward. So I think that kind of connection is really, really important in designing a claims management process that can drive impact for our customers. And even for those who don't necessarily have the blended model, having access to that information is still really critical for a claims examiner. But when you can get it in, again, almost real time, that can really make the difference and move the needle in terms of the results that you can expect from your claims management program and how you can manage the costs associated with that. Beth, I'm not sure if you have a different perspective.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, I think exactly what you said. The other thing I would add is that because our nurses are working to deliver the best possible care based upon the guidelines that they review with the employee at the time of the phone call, they really are setting up the employee for the best possible outcome by directing them to the right care provider or the right level of care from the get-go. So in circumstances in which the employee may, if they did not engage with triage and our triage model, they may just go to any old clinic. We're going to ensure that the employee is going to the clinic that is really best suited for them. And if you are using our managed care services, that would be our 4- and 5-star providers. If that means that you are nearest to a clinic and our nurse can advise you at what times they're going to be able to see you, we will make a real time call for that employee. And so I think all of these benefits around ensuring that the claim gets off to the right start from the very get-go, as Jo mentioned, along with all of the information and data points that the examiner then would have, it's really why we believe that this is one of the really best ways to get things started off when there has been the unfortunate injury or incident.
Nope, that all makes perfect sense on how it comes together, and so as we consider that, Jo, what data is available on the benefits on clinical consultation that our listeners might want to know about?
Yeah, there's lots of information that when you're assessing, the customer's assessing the value of the program, you should look at, what is your experience with lag time? Are you seeing a decline in reporting of the claims? Are you seeing a reduction in litigation? Are you seeing fewer lost time days? All of those are things that we measure to make sure we're pulling the right levers to deliver a really effective program. One of the things that Beth talked about was getting the callers to a 4 or 5-star provider, what we call a high-quality provider. That's another metric. What percentage of your callers are going to one of those providers when they require off-site care? And that's super important because we know that a high-quality provider has a significant benefit to reducing lost time days and total cost of risk for customers. And so that's something that we pride ourselves on, and we're constantly looking at and measuring to make sure that even in states where you cannot necessarily direct, but you can make recommendations to an injured employee about where they can seek treatment, making sure that we're targeting and highlighting those high-quality providers is really critical. And then the final thing I would say when you're looking at it is how many of your self-care referrals actually turn into claims. That's something I would say, here and in other places that hasn't traditionally been measured very consistently, but Cedric does a fantastic job at continuing to look at that, because if you have a self-care call that only turns into a claim 2 or 3 days later, really all you've done is kick the can down the road and delayed the claims examiner's ability to really manage and handle that claim. And so we really measure and monitor, are we making the right decisions up front so that when we say something is a self-care referral, it does not eventually convert into a claim. So there are lots of metrics I think people can measure, how quickly are calls being taken and those kinds of things. But if a customer really wants to look at what's driving impact to my total cost of risk, how am I appropriately managing those dollars to make sure that I'm containing those costs as much as possible, it's really going to be fewer lost time days, reduction in litigation, percentage of self-care referrals that do not convert to claims, and what percentage of the callers, when they require off-site care, are channeled to a high-quality provider. I think those are the 4 sort of key and critical metrics that I would look at if I were assessing if the program was effective or not. I don't know, Beth, if you have some additional thoughts that you think a customer should consider when they're evaluating the program performance.
Sure. I think, Jo, all the things that you just said are really great points. The reason why our clients use and continue to use our triage program are for those very reasons: cost containment around care and ensuring that the treatment gets off to the best start possible. I think that oftentimes we may hear in the industry about high self-care rates, which we know may at the first glance look really great, and we're saying that employees don't need to treat for an injury. However, we always tell our clients, word of caution about high self-care rates, because oftentimes we find that those individuals will actually end up seeking treatment anyway. And so we feel that while our guidelines are the Gold Star guidelines, the Thompson guidelines that we use to triage employees, we realize they might be perceived as conservative in some circumstances, but what we have determined based upon our data is that it's actually in the best interest of the employee. That very seldom do we see a self-care, essentially disposition given that then converts to a claim. And I think that's really important, that we know that we're getting employees to the right level of care each and every time, as often as possible, so that they aren't left to make a decision later on based upon the fact that they're still having to deal with their injury and they're still in pain and they don't know what else to do, and so then they take that care into their own hands. So I think that all the points there are great, and that's really again one of the reasons why our clients really value our clinical consultation program.
Well, I think this question, Beth, is probably one that we all is really the key component here. What do injured workers generally have to say about their experience with our nurses and using this program?
Sure, Jonathan. I think that, of course, is one of the things that we hold ourselves in high regard to, because we realize that the call that employee is making is very likely the first interaction that they're going to have with a Sedgwick colleague. And making sure that interaction is reflective of our core values, our caring counts philosophy, is critical. And so in the training that we do with our nurses, they are obviously encouraged to be very empathetic. We want them to ensure that they are also reviewing guidelines accurately and quickly, so that the employee is getting the care recommendation that they need as soon as possible. Largely injured employees are very satisfied with their experience with our clinical consultation nurse triage line. And I'll give you an example. We had an incident just in the past year in which an employee called our clinical consultation line, and it was a little bit of an unusual call because it wasn't the initial injury, but the employee was reporting that she was having significant pain and had previously talked to one of our nurses. It turns out that she had had surgery, and she felt the need to call our clinical consultation line because she was, in fact, in pain and knew that she needed to speak with someone. The nurse identified the employee, had called before, that she had had an injury and a subsequent surgery, and then listened to her symptoms, and actually at that time told her that she really felt like she needed to go to the emergency room based upon the pain in her chest that she was having. As it turned out, the employee actually had a pulmonary embolism, and had our nurse not identified that through going through the triage protocols with her, talking her through her pain symptoms, she could have been at risk of losing her life. And so this was really, truly a life-saving measure that our nurse offered, listening and being empathetic and trying to understand what the employee needed at the time of the call. And that's the kind of story, Jonathan, that we love to talk about, because we really do believe that our nurses are making a huge difference in injured employees' lives. And again, we're doing that all with our caring counts philosophy at the core of it.
Well, that's a great story, and I'm sure there's many, many more. So it really is amazing, and thankful that we have this and are offering it out there. And I know our nurses are amazing, our team. And so as we close out, both to Jo and Beth, if we have listeners considering Sedgwick's clinical consultation services for their workers' compensation programs, what do you want them to know before we leave? Final thoughts.
So I'll start. So I would say, again, that first interaction after the injury really sets the tone for the claim. And if you can get that injured employee to the right level of care immediately thereafter, to Beth's point around satisfaction and the impact that it makes. And then finally, that again, it's the most immediate recording of what happened around the incident after the incident occurs. And so that kind of rich information can also be impactful for how you manage your claims and how you manage your safety or workplace safety moving forward. And so I would say those are critical reasons to consider a 24/7 nurse triage solution. And again, based on the results that we've seen with Sedgwick's solution, I would say, bar none, that interaction and connection between the nurse triage and the examiner makes a significant difference in managing the total cost of risk. And that's what I think customers want.
Yeah, absolutely, Jo. I think that you nailed it when you said it's the interaction that we have, and it starts with that nurse, developing the rapport with that employee. As I said, it is oftentimes the very first interaction that they will have with a Sedgwick colleague, and it sets the tone really for the rest of the time that that employee is going to be working with us and their examiner. And we want to ensure that that experience is positive as it possibly can be in the face of something that is entirely unpleasant, like an injury happening. And in order to get it started off on the right foot, we really feel that our nurse triage program, not only does it offer an empathetic and a caring ear to that employee, but it also gets them on the right pathway from the get-go.
Well, there you have it. We have an awesome nurse team at Sedgwick, and Jo and Beth, thank you so much for sharing your insights on the nurse triage, and we encourage those out there listening, if you have questions, to visit sedgwick.com, or you can find both Beth Burry and Jo Copeland and contact them. So thank you again for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you about more exciting things in the future.
Thanks so much. Fun.
Thanks, Jonathan.